Every morning, millions of people drink a chemical that plants partly evolved to defend themselves against insects, and that chemical is caffeine. Caffeine does not actually create energy. Instead, it enters your brain and blocks receptors meant for adenosine, a chemical that builds up while you're awake and contributes to that heavy, tired feeling you get when you stay awake for a long time. The adenosine does not disappear, your brain just temporarily becomes worse at hearing its message. So caffeine is not charging your battery, it is covering the low battery warning with a tiny chemical sticker. But caffeine gets much stranger. Some flowers may use it to influence bees. Some beetles survive eating coffee beans because bacteria inside their gut help destroy the caffeine. Doctors use caffeine to help premature babies breathe. It can change the web spider's build, strengthen certain painkillers, and remain inside your body long after your cup of coffee is empty. So get yourself something caffeinated and let's explore 20 fun, crazy caffeine facts that might sound fake but are actually real. Let's get straight into number 1. Caffeine hides tiredness rather than removing it. Throughout the day, adenosine gradually accumulates in your brain. You can imagine adenosine as a growing crowd of tiny workers holding signs that say, "You've been awake long enough, please go to bed." Adenosine normally binds to receptors that help reduce alertness and increase sleep pressure. Caffeine has a similar enough shape to occupy some of those receptors first, so it essentially walks into the meeting, steals adenosine's chair, and refuses to leave for several hours. This makes you feel less tired, but does not repair sleep deprivation or create additional fuel. Your body still may be exhausted underneath the effect. Once caffeine begins wearing off, adenosine can bind to those same receptors again, and the tiredness may suddenly feel much more obvious. The familiar afternoon crash is not always caffeine creating exhaustion. Sometimes it is caffeine finally stepping aside, and that's what usually is caffeine stepping aside and revealing the exhaustion that was already waiting behind the stage. Plants appear to have invented caffeine more than once. Caffeine is found naturally in several relatively unrelated plants, including coffee, tea, cacao, guarana, yerba mate, and some citrus species. The strange part is that these plants do not appear to have inherited one caffeine-making system from a recent common ancestor. Instead, different plant families seem to have independently developed biochemical pathways that produce the same molecules. This is called convergent evolution. It happens when evolution reaches similar solutions in unrelated organisms. Birds and bats independently evolved wings. Sharks and dolphins independently developed streamlined bodies, and several plant families independently arrived at caffeine because it was good at killing some bug species. Some bug species now obviously do use it for the opposite reason, and it does benefit them in some way, kind of gets them high, but a lot of the time it provided enough advantage that it killed enough bugs that didn't get eaten and survived and reproduced, that now multiple plant families have developed caffeine. Apparently nature repeatedly looked at the problem of being eaten and decided perhaps the answer is nervous system chemistry. And let's move on to fun fact number 3. Caffeine probably evolved partly as insect defense. Plants cannot run away when something bad begins eating them. They cannot bite, chase, or file a strongly worded complaint. So many plants manufacture defensive chemicals. Caffeine is one of them. At sufficiently high concentrations, caffeine can interfere with insect feeding, development, movement, and nervous system function. A plant often concentrates caffeine in valuable tissues such as young leaves, seeds, and developing fruit. Those areas matter because they represent future growth and reproduction. A seed is essentially the plant's next generation packed into a small container, so surrounding it with bitter and potentially toxic chemicals makes evolutionary sense. Calling caffeine a bug poison is a simplification because its effect varies, of course, by the species and the dosage. But caffeine can absolutely function as a part of the plant's chemical security system. Your morning coffee began, partly at least, as biochemical, botanical pest control, you could say. So yeah, let's move on to cool fact number 4. One beetle survives caffeine by using bacteria inside its gut. The coffee berry borer is a tiny beetle with an extremely inconvenient lifestyle for coffee farmers. It drills into coffee berries and feeds on the seeds inside. Those seeds are the coffee beans. The obvious problem for the beetle is that the coffee beans contain caffeine, one of the plant's defensive mechanisms, but the beetle arrives with backup. Researchers discovered that bacteria living inside its digestive system help break caffeine down. When scientists disrupted those gut microbiomes, the beetle became much worse at detoxifying caffeine, so the coffee plant developed chemical armor. The beetle responded by forming an alliance with the microscopic chemists living inside its stomach. This is kind of like an evolutionary arms race, small enough to fit inside a coffee berry, you could say. Alright, well, moving on to fun fact number 5. Some flowers may use caffeine to influence bees. Caffeine does not always repel insects. In tiny quantities, it can appear in flower nectar. Researchers have found that caffeinated nectar can improve a honeybee's memory of a flower's scent. That could make the bee more likely to remember and return to similar flowers. From the plant's perspective, that means more pollination, so caffeine may perform opposite jobs depending on where the plant places it. In leaves and seeds, higher concentrations may discourage animals from eating the plant. In nectar, smaller concentrations may encourage pollinators to return. The same chemical can serve as both a warning and loyalty program. The bee gets sugar with a tiny stimulant bonus. The plant gets a repeat customer. Now moving on to fun fact number 6. Caffeine can change the web spiders build. Scientists have exposed spiders to different chemicals and then examined the webs they produce. Under the influence of caffeine, some spiders built webs that were smaller, less organized, and more irregular than usual. The spacing became inconsistent, the geometry became messier. The spider's normally precise construction process began looking as though the architect had lost the blueprint halfway through. That does not mean caffeines affect the human brains exactly the same way it affects the spider nervous systems, but of course humans and spiders are radically different animals, but it demonstrates that caffeine can disrupt remarkably complex behavior in other species. Some people drink coffee and organize a spreadsheet. Some spiders encounter caffeine and apparently abandon the concept of symmetry. Now moving on to fun fact number 7. Decaf coffee and other caffeinated items that claim to be decaf still contain caffeine usually, most of the time. Decaffeinated does not mean caffeine-free. It means that most of the caffeine has been removed. A typical cup of decaf coffee may still contain a few milligrams of caffeine. Of course, the exact amount varies between brands, beans, serving sizes, and brewing methods. That is much less than a regular coffee, but still not zero. For most people, the remaining amount is tiny, but it still definitely is there. However, it may matter to someone who's extremely sensitive to caffeine or drinks several cups of decaf in one evening. Decaf is not caffeine disappearing completely. It is caffeine turning the volume down and hoping nobody notices it is still in the room. Alright, well, moving on to fun fact number 8. Your liver turns most caffeine you drink or eat into another active stimulant. Your body does not simply absorb caffeine and then throw it away unchanged. Most caffeine is processed by the liver. A large portion of it is converted into a compound called paraxanthine. Paraxanthine is not an inactive pile of chemical leftovers. It can still affect the body and has caffeine-like stimulant properties. Smaller portions are converted into other compounds, including theobromine and theophylline. Theobromine is also found naturally in chocolate, while theophylline has been used medicinally because it can affect breathing and the airways. So caffeine enters your body as one stimulant and leaves behind a small supporting cast of biologically active relatives. The original molecule exists, but the caffeine family reunion continues, you could say. Now moving on to fun fact number 9. Afternoon caffeine may still be inside you at bedtime. Caffeine has a half-life that often lasts several hours on average. A half-life is the amount of time required for your body to remove half of a substance. Imagine drinking 200 milligrams of caffeine at 4 p.m., let's say like a very concentrated cup of coffee. Using a 5-hour half-time as a simple example, on average, let's say, about 100 milligrams of that could still remain at 9 p.m. Around 50 milligrams could still remain at 2 a.m. The exact timing varies significantly between individuals, but the point is that caffeine does not vanish when you stop feeling its strongest effects. You may be feeling normal for a meaningful amount of time while it's still circulating in your body, and it can interfere with sleep. The harmless afternoon coffee may unpack the suitcase and move into your bloodstream for the evening for a pretty long time, you can say. Well, now let's move on to fun fact number 10. Smokers often break down caffeine faster. Cigarette smoke can increase the activity of a liver enzyme involved in caffeine metabolism. As a result, people who smoke cigarettes often clear caffeine faster than non-smokers. This may allow some smokers to consume more coffee without feeling the effects as strongly or as for long. Importantly, the effect is mainly associated with compounds in tobacco smoke, not simply nicotine by itself. The downside is that the body adapts to this faster clearance. If someone stops smoking but continues drinking the same amount of coffee, caffeine may suddenly remain in their system for significantly longer. The coffee did not change. The body's caffeine disposal service changed its schedule, you can kind of say. Well, now let's move on to fact number 11, which is also related to smoking. Quitting smoking can make your usual coffee feel much stronger. Because smoking often speeds up caffeine metabolism, quitting can slow caffeine removal back down. And that means someone who quits smoking may suddenly experience stronger jitters, more anxiety, a racing heartbeat, greater difficulty sleeping, a much more intense response to their normal coffee than usual. This doesn't mean that it happens identically to everyone, but it is a real possibility. A person may assume quitting smoking has mysteriously made them sensitive to coffee, but in reality, their body may be keeping caffeine around for longer. The drink remained the same, the exit door became smaller. Some birth control pills can make caffeine last longer. Certain oral contraceptives can slow down the body's clearance of caffeine. That means that the same cup of coffee may have a longer lasting effect in someone taking these medications. This is one reason universal caffeine advice can be misleading. Two people can drink identical beverages at the same time and experience completely different outcomes. One person feels focused for let's say 2 hours. The other person remains alert long after the moon has arrived and started asking why the lights are so on. Medication, genetics, pregnancy, smoking status, liver function, and regular caffeine use can all change the timeline. Caffeine is a simple molecule entering a very complicated human system. Pregnancy can dramatically slow caffeine metabolism. During pregnancy, caffeine often stays in the body much longer, especially later in pregnancy. Hormonal and metabolic changes slow the liver's ability to process it. In some research, caffeine's half-life increased from only a few hours outside of pregnancy to around 10 or more hours during late pregnancy. This means an afternoon coffee may be present still well into the night. Caffeine also crosses the placenta, while a developing fetus has a limited ability to metabolize it. This is why medical guidance commonly recommends a lower caffeine limit during pregnancy. One drink may look ordinary from the outside, but the body processing it has changed its entire timetable, you can say. Now let's move on to fun fact number 14. A coffee nap can sometimes outperform coffee or a nap alone. A caffeine nap sounds contradictory. The idea is to consume caffeine and then immediately take a brief nap, often around 15 to 20 minutes. Caffeine usually takes some time to reach its strongest noticeable effect. During that short window, a person sleeps. Sleep may reduce some accumulated sleep pressure, while the caffeine begins blocking adenosine receptors at around the same time the person wakes up. Some experiments have found that this combination can improve alertness more than either caffeine or a short nap alone. Of course, timing matters. The nap must stay brief enough to avoid deep sleep and heavy cockiness. Of course, this is not as good as full sleep, but it is still pretty good. Better than either a short nap or just drinking coffee by itself. But scientifically, drinking coffee before a nap is not quite as absurd as it sounds. Now moving on to fun fact number 15. Caffeine can make certain painkillers work better. Caffeine appears in some headache and pain medications for a reason. When added to medicines such as acetaminophen, aspirin, or ibuprofen, caffeine can modestly improve pain relief for some people. It may help the medication work more effectively or help the body absorb it more quickly depending on the drug and condition. Caffeine itself is not replacing the painkiller. It is acting as an adjuvant, meaning it strengthens or supports the main treatment. The molecule famous for keeping people awake also moonlights as a backup dancer for headache medicine. Of course, more caffeine is not automatically better. Too much can also trigger headaches, anxiety, or withdrawal symptoms, but that's pretty cool. It also helps as a painkiller as well. So yeah, let's move on to fun fact number 16. Doctors sometimes use caffeine to help premature babies breathe. Caffeine is not only a beverage ingredient, it is also a real medication. Doctors use caffeine citrates to treat apnea of prematurity, a condition in which premature infants temporarily stop breathing because the systems controlling respiration are still developing. Caffeine stimulates the nervous system and can help improve breathing activity. It may be given orally, through a feeding tube, or intravenously under careful medical supervision. This is one of caffeine's most extraordinary roles. The same basic stimulant found in coffee can help a premature baby maintain the rhythm of breathing. From morning beverage to neonatal medicine, it is quite a career path for one molecule, you can say. Now moving on to fun fact number 17. A teaspoon of pure caffeine can equal dozens of cups of coffee. Coffee contains caffeine diluted in a large amount of liquid. Pure caffeine powder is an entirely different creature. A single teaspoon of highly concentrated caffeine powder can contain roughly as much caffeine as several dozen cups of coffee or hundreds of cups of tea or coke or something similar to this. That makes measuring mistakes extremely dangerous. Too much caffeine can cause seizures, dangerous heart rhythms, vomiting, severe agitation, loss of consciousness, death. Pure caffeine powder should never be treated as ordinary kitchen powder. The difference between a normal dose and medical emergency can be frighteningly small. So that's fun fact number 17. Moving on to fun fact number 18. Caffeine was once restricted as an Olympic performance enhancer. Caffeine can improve alertness, reaction time, endurance, and perceived effort in certain situations. Because of this, high caffeine concentrations were once prohibited in competitive sport. Athletes could test positive if the caffeine level in their urine exceeded a set threshold. In 2004, the World Anti-Doping Agency removed caffeine from its prohibited list. It remains monitored, but athletes are no longer banned for simply having caffeine above the previous limit, so caffeine once occupied an unusual legal category. Perfectly normal at breakfast, but potentially suspicious at the Olympic Games. Coffee temporarily lived on the border between beverage and performance-enhancing drugs. And drugs is kind of subjective because a lot of things can be considered drugs and can't be, so caffeine is, I guess, considered a drug in most situations, but yeah. Fun fact number 19. Commercial caffeine can be extracted or chemically manufactured. Not all caffeine added to drinks and supplements comes directly from coffee bean. Some caffeine is extracted from coffee or even other plants. For example, caffeine removed during the production of decaffeinated coffee can be collected, purified, and reused. Caffeine can also be manufactured through chemical synthesis. Once purified, naturally extracted, and synthetic caffeine have the same molecular structure. The molecular structure of caffeine is 8 carbon, 10 hydrogen, 4 nitrogen, and 2 oxygen, as you can see on screen here. Your brain does not check whether the molecule grew inside a leaf or came from an industrial reactor. The structure is identical. It fits the same receptors and produces the same fundamental caffeine effects. So let's move on to fun and final fact number 20. Let's go. Coffee may hide how bitter caffeine really tastes in its pure form. Pure caffeine is extremely bitter, yet coffee does not taste exactly like a cup of isolated caffeine dissolved in water, of course. That is because coffee contains hundreds of other compounds created by the bean, fermentation, roasting, grinding, and brewing. These compounds interact with one another and shape the final taste. Some roasting compounds may reduce or alter how strongly caffeine's bitterness is perceived. Coffee is not simply a caffeine-flavored water if you drink like pure black coffee. It is a crowded chemical orchestra containing acids, oil, aromatic compounds, sugar, bitter molecules, and roasted flavored products. Now, of course, if you had ever had like pure caffeine, even in extremely small amounts, you will see how bitter it is compared to like the normal coffee or like average beverage you drink like that has caffeine in it. Even though coffee is pretty bitter, pure caffeine of course is much more bitter. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but still, it's a fun fact, I guess. Well, yeah. So overall, caffeine began as plant chemistry. It helped defend leaves and seeds, influenced insects, and may even have encouraged bees to remember flowers. Humans then discovered that the same molecule could help us stay awake, concentrate, exercise, relieve certain headaches, and even treat premature babies. But caffeine still doesn't create energy. It borrows alertness by temporarily blocking the signal that tells you when you are tired, and once that caffeine wears off, that signal is still waiting. So the next time you drink coffee, tea, soda, or an energy drink, remember what is inside that cup. Plant defense chemical, a B memory enhancer, a former Olympic concern, a medical treatment, and one of the strangest molecules that humans commonly consume before breakfast. Well, yeah, that's basically it for today's video, guys. So I hope you enjoyed my 20 fun facts about caffeine. I mean, some of these weren't really that crazy or like cool, but even then, hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something new from this video. If you enjoyed my video today, please leave a like, and yeah, say like how much caffeine you guys consume in the comment section. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and bye, guys.